Some stories from Arthurian legend are full of valor. Some end in glory. But every now and then, there's a tale that doesn't quite fit the mold. One that starts with promise, runs headfirst into fate, and ends with two swords drawn between brothers who never meant to be enemies. Sir Balin and Sir Balan weren't the most famous knights in Camelot. They didn't pull legendary swords from stones or go chasing after the Holy Grail. But their story cuts deeper than most, because theirs is a story of pride, missteps, and a bond that couldn't hold against the weight of prophecy and misunderstanding. They were brothers, blood and bone, warriors molded by the same harsh world, shaped by the same ideals, and caught in the same storm. They rode for honor. They believed in duty. But belief alone wasn't enough to save them. And what followed would leave more than just wounds in flesh. It would leave scars on the land. So if you're looking for honor and heartbreak tangled into one, keep listening. This is the story of Sir Balin and Sir Balan from Arthurian legends. Balin and Balan weren't born into glory. Their names didn't carry noble weight, and their bloodline wasn't wrapped in prophecy. They were just brothers, knights from the northern lands, raised rough, trained harder, and forged in the kind of grit that didn't come from courtly grace, but from survival. Balin was the older of the two, strong-willed, quick-tempered, and brave to a fault. He had a fire in him, the kind that made people stand back when he entered a room. Not because he was cruel, but because he burned so hot that you never knew who might get scorched. Balin, on the other hand, was steadier, thoughtful, loyal to his brother without question, but not as easily swayed by impulse. If Balin was the sword unsheathed, Balan was the shield that held firm. They grew up side by side, learning to fight before they could read, learning to ride before they could write their own names. The only thing fiercer than Balin's temper was their loyalty to each other. In a world where war was constant and trust was rare, that bond was unbreakable. Eventually, they found their way to Camelot, not together, but close enough. Balin arrived first, drawn by the whispers of a noble court, a great king, and the promise of a place to prove himself. He sought knighthood not for glory, but for purpose, and for a while it seemed like he might find it there. But fate, as it often does in these kinds of stories, had other plans. And what began as a brother's climb toward honor would soon spiral into something darker, something neither of them saw coming. Balin didn't look like the kind of man who would end up cursed. He had the bearing of a warrior, tall, broad across the shoulders, with hands that looked like they belonged around a sword hilt. His face was weathered from battle, his jaw always clenched like he was waiting for the next fight. His eyes were sharp, dark, and constantly scanning, restless, like a storm about to break. He didn't smile much, and when he did, it rarely reached his eyes. That wasn't to say he was cruel, just that joy didn't come easy to him. There was always something heavy riding behind his expression, like he knew something bad was coming, and he was just trying to meet it head on. Balin, by contrast, carried a calm around him. He was nearly as tall, a bit leaner, with softer features, and a voice that soothed instead of stirred. Where Balin charged into a room, Balin entered quietly, taking stock, measuring people with the same precision he brought to a duel. He was thoughtful, more diplomatic. But don't mistake that for weakness. He could fight just as well as his brother, and sometimes better, because he didn't let emotion cloud his judgment. They were opposites in a way, one fire, one stone, but they fought like they shared the same blood and the same breath. Together, they were something few knights ever found in battle. Perfectly in sync. You'd never see one falter without the other stepping in. As for skill, both brothers were deadly. Balin was a master of the blade, preferring brute strength and speed over elegance. His strikes came fast and brutal, unrelenting. Balan, on the other hand, was more disciplined. His style was refined, controlled, almost surgical in precision. He knew how to hold back just enough, waiting for the right moment to strike. And when he did, it was over. They weren't just strong, they were clever, tactical, fearless when they had to be, and fiercely loyal. But even the sharpest swords can snap, and when loyalty collides with fate, something's bound to break. Balin wasn't always a prisoner. When he first arrived at King Arthur's court, he came as many knights did, seeking purpose, maybe even redemption. But trouble seemed to follow him like a shadow. Not because he was wicked, but because he was stubborn, fierce, prone to acting before thinking. He'd once struck a nobleman who insulted him. Quick-tempered, yes, but Balin believed in justice, especially his own version of it. The problem was, the court didn't agree. Arthur had him arrested, locked away in the castle dungeons, not for treason, not even for murder, just to cool his blood. Let him sit and think for a while. And Balin did sit, for days, weeks, maybe longer, depending on which tale you believe. He didn't beg, didn't protest, just sat in the stone-cold dark with his thoughts and his pride, both of which were heavier than the chains on his wrists. Arthur, for his part, didn't hate Balin. He admired the man's spirit, even if it was reckless. Still, a king has to keep order. He can't make exceptions for hot-headed knights with a good sword arm. So Balin stayed locked away, forgotten by most, until one strange day changed everything. A mysterious lady arrived at court, veiled and quiet, carrying a sword unlike anything the knights had seen. She declared that the sword could only be drawn by the man destined to bring great grief, and no one could unsheath it but him. Knight after knight tried, none succeeded. And then someone remembered the man in the dungeon, the one with fire in his eyes and trouble in his bones. Arthur had Balin brought forth, not out of faith but curiosity, a final shot in the dark. And of course Balin drew the sword like it was made for him, smooth, effortless. That moment should have been triumphant. It should have marked his return to glory. Instead, it was the first step down a path that would scar the land for years to come. Arthur freed him, yes, but reluctantly. Something about the sword unsettled even the king. He allowed Balin to stay, for the moment. But no one realized yet what had been set in motion. Not Balin, not Arthur, not even the lady who brought the sword. And soon after, blood would be spilled in the very heart of Camelot. The halls of Camelot had seen duels, quarrels, and even betrayal before, but nothing quite like what happened next. Balin, freshly released and still holding the mysterious sword, stood uneasy in Arthur's court. He wasn't trying to cause trouble, not that day, but fate, as always, didn't ask for his permission. The Lady of the Lake, not the one who raised Lancelot in the forest or gifted Excalibur to Arthur. This version varies in the tales, but she was still powerful, still tied to magic and mystery, and she had a score to settle. She stepped into the court with grace, but her words were anything but gentle. She demanded Balin's head, claimed he had slain her brother unjustly years ago. She didn't care that it had been during a skirmish, or that Balin saw it as self-defense. To her, justice wasn't served until blood answered blood. Arthur, caught in the middle, tried to settle things with diplomacy. But Balin wasn't one to let accusations go unanswered, especially when they came with demands for his execution. The sword in his hand, still humming with its strange curse, seemed to feed off the tension in the air. And then, just like that, it happened. One strike, clean, final. Before anyone could intervene, Balin stepped forward and drove the sword through the Lady of the Lake. Gasps echoed through the great hall, not one of challenge, not even of rage, but of disbelief. Arthur's court had rules, honor, restraint. Killing an unarmed woman, especially one of magical standing, was not just a crime, it was a stain. And Balin had just splattered that stain across the marble floor. The king rose in fury. This wasn't a man defending himself anymore. This was a man letting anger run loose with steel in hand. Balin didn't beg forgiveness. He didn't explain himself. He simply stood there, expression unreadable, sword still dripping. Arthur banished him on the spot. No trial, no defense, just a final command. Go. And so Balin left, cast out from the court, his name already beginning to rot at the edges. The sword was his now, but so was the curse. It clung to him like a second shadow, heavier than any armor. Outside the walls of Camelot, Balin was no longer a knight of the realm. He was a marked man, and his downfall had only just begun. Balin wandered from Camelot with no clear path, just the weight of his banishment and a cursed sword at his side. It hadn't just ruined his standing, it had started to poison everything around him. Every road he took seemed to bend toward ruin. Every step deeper into the wild felt like he was being led, not traveling. It wasn't long before that sword, still gleaming, still humming with something unnatural, led him to a castle shrouded in silence. He was welcomed there, kindly even. The castle was ruled by a good and noble king, King Pellam, an old man with a deep sense of tradition and a castle said to be built atop ancient relics. Some say the Holy Grail itself was hidden within its walls. Others say what lay hidden was older, stranger. Either way, Balin was shown hospitality, given rest, food, shelter. And then, as always, trouble followed. Balin found himself in a skirmish within the castle. Some say it was an argument, others claim it was a full duel with Pellam's brother. The cause is blurred in the old tales. Some blame pride, others say it was prophecy, but at the heart of it was Balin's sword. At some point, the fight grew so intense that Balin's weapon shattered. And without hesitation, he did something no guest should ever do. He ran through the halls of the castle, searching for another blade to finish the fight. He found one, a sacred spear kept hidden behind veils and warnings, a relic that no man should touch unless guided by divine purpose. But Balin didn't stop to ask. He was too consumed by rage, by pride, by the curse. He seized the spear and struck down Pellam with it. The spear tore not just through the king but through the land itself. Walls collapsed, the castle split, the earth shuddered beneath them. What had once been a thriving, noble place became something broken, cursed, dead. From that moment on, King Pellam would never rise again. The land around the castle became the wasteland, barren, poisoned, and forsaken. Crops would not grow, rivers ran dry, all because of one stroke, one cursed decision. And Balin? He survived the collapse, but just barely. For days he lay among the rubble, surrounded by silence and the distant moan of wounded stone. No one came for him, no one helped him. When he finally crawled from the wreckage, the sword was still in his hand. But he was no longer a knight, he was a curse wrapped in flesh, walking alone through a kingdom he had helped ruin. And still, his story wasn't over. Hey everyone, just a quick intermission here. I wanted to say thank you for watching this video. It really means a lot to me. Did you know that over 80% of you who are watching right now aren't subscribed to the channel? If you've enjoyed this content so far, it would be incredible if you could hit that subscribe button. It's a small gesture, but it really helps the channel grow and ensures that you won't miss any more of our fascinating stories we explore together. Also, if you're feeling generous, please give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment, and share with anyone else who may enjoy it. Your support really does make a difference and keeps the content coming. Thanks again, and let's get back to the story. Balin didn't leave the wreckage of King Pellam's castle so much as drag himself out of it. Bloodied, broken, and half-mad from the pain, both physical and otherwise, he emerged into a world that felt colder than it had before. The land behind him was dying, the skies above it always seemed a little darker. And wherever he went, whispers followed. He was no longer Balin the Brave. People had started calling him something else, the Knight with Two Swords, a title that carried more curse than praise. The first sword, the cursed one he'd drawn in Camelot, had already set ruin in motion. The second, taken in desperation from the sacred chamber, had sealed the fate of Pellam's land. and now those blades were all he had. He didn't seek glory after that. He didn't chase dragons or defend maidens. His path turned quiet, wandering. Some say he didn't speak for weeks, just rode across fields and forests, crossing bridges with no destination. Knights who saw him from afar recalled a haunted look in his eyes. Not rage, not sorrow, just the kind of numbness that settles in when a man's already been broken, but the world keeps asking more of him. He stumbled into minor skirmishes, helped the occasional traveler, even defeated a few robbers along the way. But none of it meant anything. He didn't stay long enough to be thanked, didn't accept rewards. Wherever he arrived, he was already halfway out the door. And through it all, he never stopped carrying those swords, never left them behind, as if giving them up would make the curse worse. Or maybe he believed deep down that one of them would be his end, and that he deserved it. He avoided Camelot, couldn't bear to see Arthur, couldn't face what he'd done. But fate, cruel and sharp-edged as ever, wasn't done with Balin. Because somewhere out there on one of those winding forest roads, another knight was wandering. A man just as skilled, just as burdened, and just as lost. It happened in the kind of place most stories like this begin and end. A stretch of quiet forest, mist curling low to the ground, birds silent overhead, the only sound being hooves against soft earth. Neither knight was looking for a fight that day, but sometimes fate doesn't give you a choice. Balin had been wandering for weeks, if not months, with no real aim. Just a man haunted by failure, drawn forward by nothing more than instinct. He passed under the trees like a shadow, armor dulled from neglect, face hardened by regret. Somewhere along the way, he heard news of a fortress ruled by a cruel knight who demanded combat from all who crossed his land. A tyrant barring passage, dueling strangers not for honor, but for sport. And Balin, exhausted, hollowed out, felt something spark at that. Not anger, not pride, just purpose, however fleeting. So he rode toward the fortress, silent and steady. But on the other side of that same forest, Balin was approaching too. He'd been gone from court, gone from his brother, for just as long. Searching for Balin, trying to make sense of the rumors he'd heard. Of a knight cursed by a sword. A man who had struck a holy king and left a land in ruin. He didn't want to believe it. But each tale led him closer to anguish. And now, here he was, bound for the same stronghold, ready to challenge the same lord, unaware that the final opponent wasn't a stranger at all. They met on the road just outside the gate. The fortress, ringed by stone and silence, loomed in the distance. But the real battle was already waiting. Neither knew who the other was. They wore plain helms, no crests, no sigils, just two tired knights under the weight of rusted armor and heavier stories. A misunderstanding sparked. Some say the lord of the castle pitted them against each other on purpose. Others say it was pride, two hardened men, each thinking the other barred the path. Either way, no names were exchanged, just swords. And that was enough. They drew steel, two brothers, two swords, neither recognizing the other beneath the grime and iron. There was no delay, no drawn-out challenge. The moment their blades rang together, the world narrowed to that single patch of earth. No audience, no trumpets. Just two knights locked in a brutal, unforgiving clash, each believing the other stood between him and whatever purpose was left. They fought like men with nothing to lose. Balin struck hard and fast, all muscle and momentum, his style rougher now than in his courtly days. He fought like a man used to cutting through chaos, like someone who didn't care whether he won or not, only that the other fell first. Balin, by contrast, was more measured, his form sharper, still holding on to the discipline and grace of a knight who believed in oaths, in order. But there was fire in him too. They were brothers, after all. The battle went on longer than it should have. Minutes bled into hours. Each landed blows and each took wounds. Blood mixed with sweat. Armor bent and cracked. Still they fought, breath ragged, boots slipping in the dirt, swords swinging with less precision and more desperation. They were evenly matched, uncannily so, and that only fed the fire. Neither dared yield. Neither could afford the thought that the other might be the better man. They knocked each other down, staggered back to their feet, rushed in again, and still, no names, no questions, just grit and steel and stubborn, senseless pride. At one point, Balin landed a strike across Balin's side, nearly dropping him. But Balin retaliated with a vicious downward blow that splintered Balin's shield and forced him back. It went like that, back and forth, blow for blow until the strength in their limbs began to falter. But neither backed down, not because of hate, but because somewhere deep down they both still believed they were doing the right thing. And then finally, one misstep, the kind you can't afford in a fight, left them vulnerable. Balin struck true, Balin followed with his own. And in the span of a heartbeat they both went down. Swords clattered to the ground, breaths came shallow, their bodies broken, their armor cracked. The fight was over. But the worst was still to come. The quiet that followed wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that feels too loud, like the world itself had stepped back in shock. Two warriors lay in the dirt, barely breathing, staring at the sky through cracked visors. And then, with shaking hands, they each reached for their helmets. The metal scraped, buckles came loose, bloodied fingers fumbled with the straps, and then the truth hit like a thunderclap. Balin stared into the face of his brother, his own blood, his twin in spirit, if not in exact birth. And Balin, staring back, went pale beneath the streaks of blood and sweat. Neither of them said anything at first. Their mouths opened, but the words caught somewhere between pain and disbelief. They had both dealt a fatal blow. Not out of malice, not for glory, but because fate had led them into each other's blades, masked and unknowable, at the worst possible moment. The shock settled into grief, and the grief into something heavier. Regret. It weighed on them more than the wounds, because this wasn't just a tragedy, it was preventable. A name spoken earlier, a pause, a question. Any one of those might have stopped what had just happened, but it was too late now. Their hands met between them, fingers barely touching. No speeches, no parting wisdom, just that small gesture, one final moment between brothers who had shared everything, even in death. Their breathing slowed, the light faded, and then they were gone. Not in battle against some monstrous foe, not on a grand quest, but at each other's hands. Two knights who should have grown old telling stories around the same fire, buried now by the silence of a cruel mistake. The story of Sir Balin and Sir Balan didn't end when their hearts stopped beating. Word of their death spread slowly, carried by rumor, song, and the few witnesses who came upon their bodies after the dust had settled. When King Arthur heard what had happened, how two brothers, once loyal to each other and to him, had unknowingly slain one another, he was devastated. It wasn't just grief, it was shame. A sense that this loss wasn't fate alone, but something the court itself had helped shape. Arthur had given Balin another chance. He'd welcomed him back after his imprisonment, only to watch him kill the Lady of the Lake before the court's very eyes. That act had set off a chain of events too tangled to unravel. And now, two of his bravest knights were dead, not by enemy hands, but by a cruel twist of fate. They were buried side by side. The land itself seemed to mourn them. The ground where they died was left untouched, and those who passed by swore it always felt colder than it should. The tale of the brothers lived on, not as a tale of heroism, but as a warning. Knights told it to their squires, because there was something achingly human about it, about love twisted by circumstance, and how quickly fate can turn even the strongest bond into tragedy. Balin and Balan had set out to prove themselves. Though they did in the end, it was just not in the way anyone expected. And so their names joined the long, complicated history of Camelot, etched not in gold or glory, but in blood and sorrow. a reminder that not all legends are built on victory. Some are built on the price of it.